Thank you for that, and welcome everyone. We have on this panel, I guess, the initial brains trust of the Open Metaverse Alliance, which was announced very recently. Sebastian, you came out with the announcement first at Metaverse Summit in Paris on the weekend.
We were together on stage. I don't want to claim anything. And we're just representing a group of companies. It's really a joint effort among all of us.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could maybe kick things off and describe what this consortium is, because it presents a really big statement to the metaverse industry. It's a huge thing for all of the projects that are happening.
Absolutely. So we have announced the OMA3, the Open Metaverse Alliance, free standing for Web3, as really an initiative for all the companies, mostly Web3 decentralized companies, to push for more interoperability standards, more guidelines, more frameworks on how we can collaborate and allow to create truly that notion of open metaverse, was, as we described before, allow users to use their asset across all our different application or virtual world, but also push further than just like representation of your digital file from one to another, thinking about the notion of digital identity, the notion of your reputation, your progression, and other elements as well surrounding that.
Yeah, great. Well, that's what we're...
Anybody like to add some extra thoughts?
Yeah, so we've been we got together for the first time, on video calls in January, and then met at NFT NYC in June. First time all companies together in one room. It was really a great, good atmosphere in there. And what we always said is, since we've always been developing, and we don't want to repeat, what has been done in Web 2 or so, right? Isolated, independent applications. Really see that the big paradigm shift which we currently have is that we're moving away from application-centric or platform-centric worlds, and we want to move to user-centric worlds, right? So that's the main thinking here. And they say, okay, when I'm a user, I want to go to AlienWorlds, Sandbox, or all the other members which we have now in the signed up. And so, I'm a user, and maybe I have a car, right? I'm using an Upland, right? I'm racing it or whatever I do, right? But now I want to go to Sandbox and use it there as well. So what does this mean, and how does this, because obviously when we look at our worlds here, they look visually different, so that needs to be somehow translated, because otherwise the aesthetics are not great. You have different characteristics, right? You have to see, okay, if you have, let's say, an odometer in the car, right, and you drive around a lot, right? Can you still then start at basically zero in Sandbox, and so these kind of things we have to solve, right? And of course, to set the expectations right, it's not that easy. And we also, first of all, we want to be completely blockchain agnostic, right? So at the end of the day, blockchain should not matter in that sense. It's really, again, user always at the center of everything, and the most important thing is that we have time for that, because it's not going to happen tomorrow, right? We know interoperability is a very difficult thing. So what you're probably rather going to see that we start between different projects as to somehow do stuff together. And then we take it from there. And actually, since we announced it, Saro and Sebastian and Baptiste, they were in Paris, used the Metaverse conference to announce it for the first time. Yesterday, we did offer the press release, and we had, I think, almost 100 people already, or companies already signing up. So it goes very fast. And sorry, I'm talking so long. But the last thing is also. There's also the Metaverse Standards Forum, which has been also announced, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago by, let's say, the big companies, Microsoft, Epic, I don't know, lots of companies in there. Obviously, they did not mention Web3, and we had worked on that anyways from before. So we want to work with that alliance as well, right, or that forum. It's not that we're doing some competitive thing here, because we believe we will focus on what is important for Web3, NFT things, and so on, right? However, if there's standardization across file formats or whatever, then we're going to work also with that forum in order to bring things together, right? We don't want to develop things in the ivory tower.
Maybe one thing to add, like we didn't mention all the companies that are already founding member of and contributing to that effort. Maybe, Upland, obviously, AlienWorlds, Animoca Brands, Dapper Lab, Crypto Voxels, now Decentraland, Sandbox, Space. So what I really appreciate is like we've been able to gather most of the actors of the industry, no matter the size that they have, to fully be aligned on this movement.
Yeah, so I guess just to take
a bit of a step back, because there might be some people in the room who don't know about Upland and AlienWorlds, and I guess we know about Animoca, but maybe Dirk, do you want to continue and just give us a rundown of Upland and Saro, AlienWorlds and Animoca Brands with Robbie?
Okay, raise of hands who had heard of Upland? Just put it in here, right? Okay, good. So Upland is basically also a metaverse based on the real world. We've been around since 2018. We have 260,000 landowners, over 3 million registered users. And since we're based on the real world, we're live in 18 cities across the US. We just announced that we're going to Rio now in Brazil. We're also going to come to Europe. Also always connected to partners. So we have a partnership with FC Porto. That's the reason we're coming to Europe. We have a partnership in the US with the NFL Player Association. And basically what you do in Upland is, you can purchase land on the actual parcels. We have very gamification elements in there. We were inspired by the game of Monopoly. We introduced now cars, so you can go from A to B with cars, right? Or you have to take a plane when you want to go San Francisco to New York, do car racing. But what our mission is that we want to enable the entrepreneurial metaverse. So people can run and operate shops in Upland, businesses. And so they can, for instance, they can, create digital goods, or they acquire from the NFLPA digital goods and then operate those shops and, sell those to others, or create whatever they like to create. But that's a little bit the vision and mission.
So I'm Sarah McKenna, the co-founder and CEO of AlienWorlds. So AlienWorlds is an NFT and DAO-based metaverse. So we have utility NFTs as part of the system. You use your land and tool NFTs to mine the fungible token Trillium, which then becomes your governance token on 6 competing planet DAOs. So we see DAOs. DAOs are tokenized on-chain entities that have a single token that describe the permissions of a group of people. So what they really are a team. And of course, teams are very natural concepts within gaming, right? So a DAO to us is a team, a group of people who are competing between the DAOs with each other, and they're using that fungible token Trillium to do that competition, which they've earned through the mining game. So we're creating a bit more of a closed loop in terms of what you can do with the token. We have a vision to create a whole universe of DAOs where anyone can create their own DAO. Our gaming logic runs almost entirely on-chain, which is somewhat unusual. We run on the Wax blockchain, and we also have gaming functionality on BNB chain, which is the former Binance Smart Chain, and our token is also on Ethereum. So we run an interoperability bridge between those 3 chains just for our own project. I think we're the largest play-to-earn game, the largest blockchain game by users, with 7.5 million lifetime users. And so I think what we're really excited to do as part of this OMA 3 is really to bring a user-centric approach with all these users that we have, to be able to introduce them to new games, and of course to be able to use their NFTs across the games. I'd love afterwards to speak a little bit about the significance of that, because interoperability is sort of a technical thing, but there's a sort of deeper significance to it too. But yeah, pass it on.
Yeah, so Robbie, we were talking a little bit about Animoca's reach. I know it's probably hard to quantify in a short space of time exactly how spread out you are, but maybe just to encapsulate, the ethos of Animoca.
Our core business is games. Obviously, we make a variety of different games. We have studios all around the world, and the most famous of which is the Sandbox. Thank you, Sebastian, for the great introduction. And then also we're actually one of the most active investors in the Web3 space as well, with a core focus on gaming, but also in the wider sort of reach of NFT culture. So that includes art and music and a little bit of DeFi and all kinds of other things related, because again, we get back to this theme of interoperability and the network effects that are available to us in Web3 when we cooperate together using open standards. So that's also why we're quite excited to be part of this alliance, because I think when you think about the benefits of Web3, obviously true digital ownership is at its heart, But once you own your own digital stuff, you want to take it with you wherever you go. And that interoperability, I think, is going to be the feature which really differentiates this new version of the internet, in our opinion. So it's quite important to be able to demonstrate that. But as has been alluded to mildly, it's very hard. And so it's important that we start to get together as an industry and think about how we can best do this, because the faster we can do it, I think the faster Web3 grows.
So we mentioned before how the Alliance and the Open Metaverse, the Web3 projects, are keen to engage with the Metaverse Standards Forum. I'm keen to know, is the Metaverse Standards Forum keen to engage with Web3? I mean, when it announced, I remember you tweeted, Sebastian, that there was no mention of Web3. And I guess another big announcement of a few days ago was Minecraft, or should I say Microsoft, saying they're not going to deal with NFT projects, which means that a really exciting project called NFT Worlds is now staring down the barrel of oblivion. Can we delve into the relationship with the Metaverse Standards Forum? This is a consortium of like Epic and who else is on my list here? Google, Intel, IKEA. I'm not sure what role they're going to play, but like big brands, big corporate brands. So, you know, how does the Alliance deal with something like that? You know, can we all play together nicely?
So we already had a call with them. So it was a little bit, that's a little bit oversight from their end, right? But they welcome us. And since we're forming now the Open Metaverse Alliance, or OMA 3, right? So we will represent ourselves. So we're going to have a delegation, right, who then represents the Web3 organization in there.
I think it's probably important to note that, I think that a lot of people, journalists, participants in the space, are trying to understand and come to terms with this sort of paradigm shift that Web3 represents, right? Web3 fundamentally represents systems in which there is less within a proprietary walled garden, right? So the system is described by its tokens. They're tokenized systems running on a blockchain. That means they're co-owned by everybody who holds the token. In our system, for example, in AlienWorlds, it wouldn't be possible for us to just turn off some of the assets of people, right? In the same way as potentially that's possible, and as we've seen this week, in fact, in Web 2 systems. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these two worlds are in opposition to one another. It just means that one is a progression of the other, and that everyone is, especially I think in what preceded it, is trying to understand the implications of that. And of course, if you are running a successful business, any kind of, especially radically different challenger is going to be something that you have to get your heads around at least, right? And possibly a little bit more. So that process takes a bit of time, and I think it's certainly in all of our interests to work together. Firstly, to educate everybody, players, technologists, companies, governments, about what this new technology and way of interacting really is and the significance of it, and then to form, where possible, links and bridges. But primarily, our purpose is to speak to users and to represent, users' interests in this new Web3 era that we are certainly walking into right now.
And do you see any of the businesses on the Metaverse Standards Forum side or the closed Metaverse side moving into more open experiences? Like hitting blockchain?
I think they came together around this initiative because actually they are the one that struggle the most about the concept of being interoperable, like centralized application exchange with each other with centralized APIs, which they need to actually coordinate, each one wanting its own standard to win over. Each one willing that its own 3D file format wins over others and having conflicting business interests to that. Whereas in Web3, we already use blockchain technology, we have the token that represents the asset, and we do not need to even discuss about an API standard to recognize the asset of each other. So in that perspective, it might have been more urgent for them first to try to get some consensus among themselves, even though. And they might have oversight indeed the existence of Web3 being so focused on their own problems. Nevertheless, we've spoken with them and with some companies in the space. Those companies have already also spoken publicly, the CEOs of Fortnite, the CEOs of Epic, Tim Sweeney, or CEO of Roblox, CEO of Meta have already expressed their vision about NFTs. So they have a certain level of awareness about what they are doing. And some companies have been approaching us. We have communication around panels. I was in Paris at Vivatech, and there was Epic among us discussing about, yes, we need to let users own their asset and do more with their assets. So it's definitely progressing. Unfortunately, it's not progressing for some. Like, have we seen last week the announcement by Microsoft through Minecraft to essentially turn off by the possibility of users and their ecosystem to use NFT in a very black and white manner, like just not allowing any understanding of what's happening in the space or discussion. We've seen that before, I think over 6 months with Steam as well, turning off around games using blockchain. Again, having a very closed mindset and not engaging into a conversation. And it's been our role, I've done that through the Blockchain Game Alliance before, to write an open letter to Steam that it's killing creativity and an ecosystem and beyond the economy that could be underlying underneath, and the opportunities for developers and more innovation. And here again, I think it's our role to express that it's really a lost opportunity in 2022 to keep into this direction.
So let's look at the users of, the Robloxes, the Fortnites, and then Sandbox, Decentraland, AlienWorlds, Upland, etc. As you mentioned in your presentation, Sebastian, the open metaverse and particularly Sandbox is about educating, building a community, getting creators on board, and this notion of ownership. This shift from Web 2 to Web 3 is about being just consumers to being owners of what you create and what you own digitally. But as we saw with Web 2, people were very happy to be corralled into Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and fed curated content. Do you feel like as the mainstream arrives at the metaverse, they're going to really care how they get their metaverse, so to speak? Maybe, Robby, do you want to kick that off?
Sure. I think going back to the general theme about this being thinking about a player-centric universe, I think it's about having that choice. So I think it's up to consumers to choose whether they want to opt into a highly curated experience where they're fed lots of things that are chosen by other people, or if they want to have agency to be able to make all those choices for themselves. And that applies to things like advertising as well. Because I think the interesting thing is that in Web3, we kind of, we turn some of these business models on their heads a little bit. So for example, a lot of the concern about Web 2 and people spending a lot of time on social media and such is because it's designed as an attention economy. So it requires the attention of the users in order for those companies to make money. Whereas when you're actually giving ownership and selling assets, Sebastian's quite happy if I buy a lot of land in Sandbox, but maybe I don't use it this week, I only use it next week. He doesn't need me to be there 3 hours a day, every day, staring at my land for him to make money, because it's a transaction of ownership. So therefore, we can leave users to feel free to do what they like, and we're not trying to force behaviors out of them necessarily like that. So I think that actually opens up a lot of new opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the main sort of possibility that's opened up through Web3 and ownership is freedom, right? The freedom to own your own assets, then the incentivization to be part of that community, to grow, as Sebastian was saying, centering creativity. Also, I think entrepreneurship, I do think both of those two things are indicative of people having agency, ownership, and freedom within a system. And I think a fundamental thesis that most people would buy into is that you're going to engage people more when you respect their autonomy and you give them a place to be themselves, to create or to provide services, to be remunerated for that, to meet other people bilaterally without that necessarily going through some kind of prescribed, middleman, and whatever that platform has actually built. So really what we're talking about here is the difference between what a small group of people who run one particular platform can do, which has, in the Web 2 era, been significant. I mean, those companies have become the tech giants and have built substantial products that have defined, the last 10 years of our lives. But what were they, why did Facebook have to rebrand as Meta and have to undergo this massive change in its business model? Because it was gradually dying, essentially. So a walled garden and a small group of people where there isn't the possibility for sort of inflows and outflows organically because people are actually participants as creators and entrepreneurs within a system has a lifespan. It has a sell-by date. And there isn't the possibility for regeneration built into that model, right? They have to go through this major effort to regenerate themselves and it's not natural to their DNA, we think, probably. Whereas what Web3 systems have is this natural inflow and outflow of people, ideas, like Robby was saying, you can buy land but not use it straight away, you could have a business model, you could be a creator. That's a huge amount of human potential and energy, all focused in a single system with all the network effects, the people socializing within that, learning new skills, monetizing that position. I think that if I were going to place my bet, I know which one I'd place it on, right? It's lots of people versus a small number of people, no matter how big their balance sheet is, honestly, because that doesn't last forever. A group of people is always going to be more productive and creative, and that's really what Web3 is bringing.
I guess people look at the number of users in these closed metaverses and they look at the number of people who are, let's say, wandering around Decentraland Sandbox goes through alpha seasons, but and the argument is that, well, there's a lot more happening there as opposed to, a Decentraland. And I guess, that doesn't bring into account Upland and AlienWorlds because, that they're huge games. But yeah, I guess Sebastian, you were going to respond to that, or?
Yeah, I guess I can start. Obviously, we're competing in a way in front of tech giants who have hundreds of millions of users, if not billions of users. And we are still early on. We've been building for almost 4 years, almost each of us. So now we're in 3 million to 7 million users. I guess we're not too far to the 10 million. Give it a little bit more time. What's important, and back to the previous question, is not necessarily to try to convert absolutely those existing users, but to think like the pie will keep enlarging because overall we have 5 billion humans who are connected to internet, 2.5 billion humans who are playing video games. And I feel like there's already a generation that has skipped through Facebook, that has skipped through Instagram and already moved towards TikTok or those new experiences. There's a lot of the human population who can see in Web3 an opportunity to actually make a better living and access more opportunity, whereas they've been traditionally left over by the older free-to-play business model or traditional model, and that now have chances to be brought on an equality level with our more developed economies of the rest of the world. So in my opinion, Sandbox and other virtual world can also grow, not in the shadows of existing Web2 platform, but just by having metaverse native generation of users who enter playing games or all form of experiences for the first time and are not ever be wondering to go back to the previous model, just like we've seen those evolution in music industry, in movie. Nobody buys DVD anymore, even everyone watched it on streaming. Same for music, nobody listens to music on radio tape. So I think Web3 is here to stay, and once you're in Web3, you will traditionally no longer go back to Web2 kind of experiences. And that movement is going to keep growing.
Yeah, I think that. So we are still so young as an industry, right? I mean, NFTs are around now 2017, right? Or so. I don't know, so 18 or so. So it's, and when you're a developer, right, and you have a problem on blockchain, when you're working on a centralized database, right, you Google it and you find someone who solves your problem, right? But we always have to do pioneering work because there's no solution to your problem, right? We have to solve, scalability issues on blockchain. We have costs, right, for the users, and there's a lot of things, user experience, right? when we think about it, I mean, right now in this group here, also in this room, is probably still very much, into whole NFTs and so on. But 95% of the people who are out there, right? I don't know if they really want to deal with private keys and all that, wallets and so on, right? I mean, yes, that's good, self-custody and everything, but most people want to call someone or write an email when they lost their password, right? We should not forget that, and that's why we also have to come up with new ideas how we solve that, right? And when we solve that, I think then we're going to catch up. But when I see sometimes those videos on YouTube right now, where gamers, hitting on blockchains, it's all scams, and they don't have users and so on. Yeah, but when you were 2 years old, you didn't have that either, right? So I think that's, and we just need time to develop that, right? But as we're coming together, first of all, as groups, I think that would accelerate it, and because we enable this true ownership and creativity, I think that's which is this disruptive force. Because when you centralize, when you think about, I don't want to get political, but when you think about systems when they were centralized, you didn't have a lot of innovations. Innovation was always there when it was really decentralized, with the market economies and so on. And that's what we're standing for, basically. And that's where we think it takes a time to take up to speed then, but we will probably accelerate quite a lot, next few years.
That's an interesting point in regards to like periods of innovation, because we're currently in a downturn, to maybe put it conservatively. But a lot of people say that it's a great time to put your head down and build. So, how are each of your projects dealing with this current period? What do you do to convince people that crypto wasn't a flash in the pan, or Web3 isn't going to be this massive failure? Because I guess on the peripheral, when you just sort of read a little bit in the mainstream press, it's like, oh well, that was the metaverse. What a joke that was. So how do you keep the momentum going? And yeah, I guess Robby, if you want to kick that off, and then if we can hear how the individual projects are kind of coping and dealing with that.
So I think the best example is that if you look at all of the most successful Web3 projects in entertainment, at least, they all started in a market that was much worse than this. And I think, these people to my left represent all of this is like the class of 2017, 2018, right? And building these kind of products is really, really hard. As Dirk alluded to, many of the things that you do every day is you have to invent technology to solve a problem, because a problem comes up and there's no solution because there's no playbook that's been written for this before. So building this kind of stuff is very hard. But I do think that markets like this represent a huge opportunity to focus on product with little distraction, because that markets go up and down and they will change. But if you get the product right, users will come and success will come with that. And I think this is the example right here to my left.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, we don't feel a difference in the downturn except for the amount of sort of outside attention. But that's not, what we're doing is building and now coordinating, which I think is, really useful. I think if you've worked in crypto for a while, you become very immune to these types of ups and downs, so it's not something that I spend a lot of time on. There's no doubt in my mind that the technology is sound. What it does to communities is visible and has, we can see it in real life. Yeah, the downturn is just another cycle.
Yeah, it's another cycle. Of course, on the macroeconomic level, it's a little bit kind of awkward this time because, of course, when you think about Bitcoin's going up and down, but now we've all this inflation in the world, right? With war going on and all that. So it's a very special time, so we don't know how long it's going to last. But and particularly speaking, for us in Upland, since we always have chosen a little bit different approach, because we didn't have an external token. That's maybe some of the reasons you didn't hear so much about us. But but that was our users didn't use really their value because of the crypto downturn, right? So they're quite happy about that. And but overall, it's now the time to build. And actually, I'm quite happy that this is happening right now. Sounds a little weird, but I think then, because unfortunately there were lots of projects where I'd say, they're not doing good to the industry, right? And, hopefully they'll go away and then we have really something which is going to build, which is productive, and not, just trying to scam people or so.
Nothing has changed like we've been always building. We're starting providing tools for people to build. We're expanding them. We only introduced the tokens such as land and asset after 2 years of providing the tools and having a community of creators, of artists, people who really came here first and foremost for the value of the platform, like empowering creators. And so I believe like people can see, hopefully, with the Alpha Season 3 and already everything that we've achieved, the fact that we have over those 100 builder studios around the world. Some of them you can meet at the conference now, and there's more and more of them. I think like many projects have now something to do in Sandbox and have been educated and learned to use. It's a true testament to like that dedication that we had on focusing on only one thing, and that's building.
Just to back to a point that you made, Dirk, about how Upland is perhaps not as well known, and I think you could probably extend that to AlienWorlds. You know, people talk about the metaverse, and the usual sound bites go to the Sandbox, to Decentraland, but you have wildly successful projects with a lot of users. So, if I'm starting a metaverse project tomorrow, what advice do you give in order to, you know, get your project out there and in this period of building? You know, what's the plan? What's a great way to kind of get yourself out there and develop and build and innovate?
So I can take one step first. First of all, why we're not so much seen is because, unfortunately, the way the reality works is, you know, you have a few websites who do rankings and so on, and I want to pick a particular one, right? But they're only tracking certain blockchains and certain assets, right? So, and, you know, we're just not getting tracked. So when you're now a journalist, right, and they go to those websites and find the top 5 projects, right, they just wouldn't find us, right? Because we're not being tracked there. And but that's an issue, right? And that's why we have to come up with also standards, right? To somehow develop that this is not biased, right? At the end of the day, so that's one thing. Advice, I think, you have to build something what people like, what they love, what they want to do, and don't only go for the speculators. Anyways, you won't get the speculators right now in the downturn, anyways, right? But it's really make them laugh, make them enjoy, make them come together, right? In Upland, we have people, they're in San Francisco, but they're coming from all over the world, creating virtual neighborhoods, creating, certain art districts, right? They've never met in real life, but now they're the best friends and so on. I think that's stuff you have to do as a creator to enable that, right? And then you will succeed. That's my 2 cents.
I think I would say that, well, first on your first question about why some projects are more visible than others, I mean, I have to credit the Sandbox and the other large projects for having built something really incredible. And although our companies were all kind of founded at a similar time, we started life actually building DAOs and building them for sort of serious applications. And then after realizing that was too early, honestly, we then decided to put that into a game, but a couple of years later. So we are a little bit later to the sort of blockchain game party, and so still building some things that I think are probably already in place in some of the other companies. But we hope very much to, as the tide rises and as some of the larger projects have risen that tide, I think we all benefit. And I think we've possibly, we did break lots of records in terms of user numbers. So, I think that was also something that we contributed to the space as well, was showing that certain blockchains were capable of supporting high transactional volumes and a lot of user numbers. Around advice for new projects, I think that a really great thing to do is to start within an existing community. So we all 3 have projects that welcome in and where there is a huge amount of grassroots development, both technical development, but also just community development. We have companies actually that have developed, so we don't, but companies exist that service the AlienWorlds Metaverse. For example, NFT creation services, NFT drop services, data. There's a huge amount of on-chain data that can be extracted and then analyzed for commercial benefit to various parties. So already there are commercial propositions that have arisen within AlienWorlds, but there are certainly a number of communities that have arisen. They have their own Telegram and Discord channels. They run their own community events, their own Twitch streams. So that's it. And in fact, they run some sort of low-tech gaming functionality as well. So they don't necessarily always encode it into smart contracts running on a chain, but they run little games with our NFTs or NFTs that they've created to sort of as a layer on top of the game functionality that we've built that runs on chain. So that's a great place to start. I mean, I think it's certainly good to amplify something that already exists. So, come into one of these metaverses, find a community. Our communities are really welcoming. So if you just come into our general Telegram or Discord, you will quite soon find a niche, and then you'll be directed off to another Telegram or Discord channel where you can find a group of people who are building. They'll have their own, events and activities coming up. That's a great place to start because you can cut your teeth, you can try ideas. I think that's actually pretty much one of the amazing things about the metaverse is it's an environment, and oftentimes a single economic environment, right? Especially if there's a fungible token that describes it. Where you can test ideas, whether that's creative ideas, community ideas, technical ideas. You can find out what works and what doesn't. And then, as we've seen with a number of projects, the very largest of those actually become sizable projects in their own right and might even tokenize themselves to great success as well. So a great starting point is within an existing project. Find a community, start building, and figure out what works for you.
Robby, Animoca has got its finger in a lot of pies. Do you have insights on what makes a great project or what you need to do to get a great project off the ground?
I think it's like any business. It's a number one, a passionate team that I think really understands how to connect with an audience, because a lot of it is finding your people, so to speak, meaning finding a user, because we always talk a lot in this industry about building community, and at its heart, I think what you recognize in all the most successful projects is that they have put together a community that reinforces themselves, whether they are a community because they like to play and hang out together, or they like to build together, or they have a shared passion of whatever the feature, content is, whether it's a particular sport or, space theme or whatever the shared interest is. But it's about that community. And what you end up doing with the project, of course, as a company, is monetizing the presence of that community, because you're fostering that community and giving them tools with which to share their passions. So I think it's about figuring out where that community is, and the beauty of sort of this serendipitous journey of Web3 is that community may not be the community that you look for at the beginning. The community you end up with may be completely different, because the community will also inform your journey as a developer, because often we start creating projects that turn into eventually something completely different. But it's great because it's a conversation that you have with your audience.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how much time we've got left, but because I want to get to some questions for the audience. But just one final question: Time Magazine's most recent cover, trumpeting Metaverse as the new digital era, this amazing period that we're moving into, which is obviously highlighting Matthew Ball's article, and he's got a book to promote, but it was a great cover. And so I just wanted to, because he makes a lot of predictions in that piece and in his book, just want to do a quick whip around, like, in your view, each of your views, the next, 2 to 5 years, you can go further if you like, but just give us your predictions on the open metaverse, where you see it going. What are going to be the big things to watch out for, or what you'll be aiming for as a project? Robby, did you want to start that?
Sure. My definition of metaverse must include Web3 in there. If it doesn't, I don't think it's the metaverse, but that's my bias, because I think part of the idea of the metaverse is being able to own things that you bring from place to place, because otherwise it's just an application, in my view. So I think that part's quite important.
Yeah, I'd say where will we be in 2 to 5 years' time? So I think that people will have become more, users will begin to expect the types of rights that they have, that the Web3 applications and platforms give them, in contradistinction to Web2. So I think users will be driving that more and more. I think that probably some of the large incumbents will still be defending a kind of legacy position, but the direction of travel will almost certainly be blockchain spaces and technology. I think that what we're going to see more and more is companies arising within the metaverse. So like I mentioned, in AlienWorlds, there is another company that's arisen, or a division that is servicing that. I think more and more distinct creative collectives, but also commercial enterprises will have been born within the metaverse, and that will be their entire native kind of construct will have been commercial enterprise within a metaverse environment. The open metaverse will, of course, continue to, I mean, we're really only separate metaverses right now because of technical constraints, and so that will continue to evolve. And I think that we're going to also see a progression beyond gaming. So currently, metaverses and gaming are very associated with each other, but actually, the metaverse is really a shared space. And that doesn't need to be built out in AR or VR. That space could be the collective of people, co-owners, who are building that out together. And so whilst gaming is a very natural first sort of application or thing to bring to a metaverse environment, there's lots of other things that would be natural to put there, like further communication, social, other enterprises, even education. I mean, that's a theme that's been coming up a lot. So more and more of activity will move into a metaverse environment, and users will, I think, that will be their expectation. That will be their baseline expectation, is of ownership and creating that in collaboration with the initial creators of the platforms.
So I think at the end of the day, we are all platforms for the metaverse, right? We are not applications for the metaverse, because we want the community to create those applications, right? So for instance, in Upland, we have now we're launching a third-party developer platform. We just had a hackathon where they can build something on top of it, right? We have the NFT portal where people can import NFTs from the Ethereum or Solana, whatever, into Upland, use them there to really represent the openness. So when it comes into the 2 to 5 year prediction, ideally, when you think about what has happened in 2.0, right? So you had Apple, right? And of course the phone, which was somehow the platform, right? But then a new business model came up which was basically Instagram, right? Taking photos and then you had a stream, right? So I hope that in 2 to 5 years, it's actually not us having created the Instagram, right? But maybe someone out of the community. They're just using our platforms, and ideally they sit on Sandbox, AlienWorlds, Upland, essentially wherever, right? And they can everywhere, but it's something overall which is then user-centric, and people will, it will has a reach and cultural relevance like Instagram today.
Yes, I agree. Like, it's all the intention of supporting the creator economy, empowering new people as well as existing people through those possibilities. The one thing I'm thinking about is basically metaverse is now part of our culture. Like, we're seeing it on the cover page of like the most prominent magazine that used to be and still are reference for newspaper, and it goes beyond that. It goes into many aspects. Like, we find it in music, we find it in movies, we find it in gaming, we find it into many forms of entertainment, both in the real world and the virtual world now. And that's something that we'll start progressively aggregating as part of the new normality. Again, I go to this idea that the very notion of virtual reality is no longer virtual when we're starting to all accept that, well, it's part of our life, and this is how we spend time and how we represent ourselves with our digital identity. And we're getting more and more exposed to new type of experience that we didn't used to do. So 10 years ago, we found it like swiping on finger and seeing a lot of like pictures of people sharing content all the time was a new kind of experience, and that gave birth to a lot of application from Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, etc. Today, I think like the metaverse and being able to experience through a 3D character into like spatial environments will be the main way to access information, to work, to educate ourselves, and to socialize with others. Most of the content that Matthew Ball has been writing, I think, is definitely on point. I think he's missing a big part around Web3, and it's still on us to keep educating him about that. So I have good hope, and I'm, yeah. And and we have another book as well where we didn't miss that part, actually. So you buy the 2 books and see for yourself. And you know that like they are analysts, so they just can try to predict things based on like existing data they have. We are visionaries, so we have to build a future for them, like to show like where we can move forward.
Thank you for that. Could you please thank our visionaries on the stage? And I guess questions if we have time. Do I need to hand out the mic or put a hand up? I can distribute. I'll jump over here. Was there one over here? Yeah.
Hi guys. So one of the things which has come up is like McKinsey came up and said the metaverse opportunity might be a $5 trillion economy by 2028. So like 5-6 years from now. How do you guys see that's a very, very big number. What do you guys see as the big allocation of opportunity there? Like if it is $5 trillion, where is the first $2 trillion going to be?
Okay, so I'll start. I think in that respect, they're just basically referring to, in my opinion, the idea that Web3 is the next version of the internet. So it's kind of like saying, well, the internet's going to grow. Because I think that this is just the direction of travel of all internet applications, because it makes sense to use blockchain as that underlying transactional and security layer. So I think e-commerce, gaming, all kinds of interactive content will eventually move to Web3 in one form or another. So it's a combination of migrating everything that currently exists, but also, as Sebastian alluded to earlier, broadening the pie dramatically, because we're really unleashing the potential of the creator economy, in a way that we've never seen before. I think some of these platforms like Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite are just scratching the surface, because they didn't really allow the creators the full breadth to do what they wanted. So now we'll unlock that with Web3.
I guess I would add that the sort of Web3 business model relies on tokenization. So tokens will make up part of that number. And in fact, I would say that probably something that we will continue to see more of is business models that are fundamentally proprietary in Web 2, just sort of creating some tokens and then calling themselves Web 3. And so if you then include all of that, then you also can get to those kinds of numbers. So, but remember that is probably, that's a fairly cosmetic thing that probably doesn't really unleash any economic potential. It's probably just a way to sort of keep stakeholders happy that the company is, moving with the times. So, yeah, I would say that being aware that a fundamentally Web3 construction relies on, the majority of the project being tokenized and widely held, as opposed to just a sort of peripheral part of that is worth noticing when you kind of look at projects and try and assess whether they're really kind of, building themselves on Web3 foundations. But I would say those are the ways that number, you can get to that number.
So you feel the $5 trillion number is more for rebranding and just calling it Web3 than actual web being built on top of it? Or additional...
No.
Was it Web3 they're referring to, or was it Metaverse? Well, then it includes gaming, I think, because it's a very high number, and Web3 alone, maybe the tokens go crazy, right? But otherwise, I doubt that is going to happen, right? It should include normal gaming.
Well, I think it's definitely including gaming and also like creator economy. Like when you start having anyone become a creator and able to create and sell content, and also the fact that all the value before was actually captured by the platform, sold once and done. There was literally no secondary market for any kind of digital goods. Whereas now, like, it's really like in the real world, like we know already like secondary market for houses, for cars, for books, for video games. All of them, they represent just by on their own, sometimes more than half of the original industry over the past year. Shared economy, crowd economies as well have been contributed to that, and we're just going to see that happen now into the metaverse and digital world. So that will account for a lot.
So you've talked a lot about the metaverse and the future, and as you said, Robby, there's no playbook that we are following right now. So we're coming across new challenges, and we are finding solutions to these challenges. And I wanted to ask, rather than asking, how do you think the future would look like? It's up to us how the future is going to look like, because we are building it. And I wanted to find out if you have any ideas on interoperability with regards to one business potentially missing out on the revenue, because if you're bringing that asset into this new ecosystem, you're not going to spend money in order to create avatar, or create certain clothes or wearables, because you're migrating. Do you think there will be some type of toll fees, charges, gated access, little tickets that you'll be buying? How do you think that revenue model would be changed or innovated? Because anybody who's part of an open metaverse alliance would have to sort this out eventually. These new companies that have only been building for a few years, they have to iterate. They have to change the models to essentially create this interoperable world.
Maybe I'll take a very short answer to that, which is the way I see it. I think you always have to have two kinds of revenue streams in mind as a builder. You have to have one which is the NFT collections of playable content that I create, and hopefully people buy or trade those. But the second one is my experience, which we used to call a game. So my experience, or my metaverse, my game, whatever you want to call it, needs to also have a revenue model, because I'm thinking about all the people who are coming into my experience with their assets from other places. And so maybe I have ways for them to upgrade or enhance their play, or add, cosmetic customizations to things they bring with them. So I think of two different user constituencies: people who come to me first, who buy things from me, but also people who come with their own stuff, who can then benefit from, I charge them corkage, so to speak. You know what I mean?
I think the interesting part is, first of all, we want to have multiple platforms, right? Because like in today, right, you watch sometimes a sports channel, sometimes a news channel. So people go somewhere because they have certain moods, or they find a certain community there, whatever. But just imagine from business or economic standpoint, you come in there, you already have maybe clothing, right? You don't need to spend money again to buy it. Now you can use the same money, in case you want to spend money, right, in order to maybe buy a car or something, right? Now actually the world's going to be much more enriched, because now people can do even more, right? And this will accelerate it, right? It's not actually either or. I think that's probably not, when you just think of from the pure platform perspective, for us, I'm happy to take Sebastian's avatar if they drive our cars, right, or something. So I think that's probably, and this is why it will be accelerate much more in the future than traditional worlds where they say, oh, everything has to be in our world, and we don't accept that.
Yeah, I think one thing to add there is that one of the definitions of especially a gaming system with NFTs being decentralized, is that you don't actually have to request. It's unpermissioned in the sense that you don't have to request permission of the original creators of the collection, for example, in order for somebody to create a bridge and then bridge that somewhere else. Now, for example, in our case, our game smart contracts wouldn't necessarily recognize other NFTs than the ones that we've coded them to read, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't port an NFT into the system and use it anywhere else that's been created within the metaverse. So that's the freedom, I guess, that I was mentioning before, and it's a double-edged sword. It really is, right? Like, it means that people can come into our environment. I can't prevent. I mean, we're talking about interoperability and coordination, but I think that that's in order to accelerate and facilitate and create standards for something that we can't prevent anyway, honestly. These bridges can be done by other people. The NFTs are owned by people who aren't me. They're owned by the users. And so this interoperability will happen. It's just that we're trying to facilitate it at a technical level. So, the free market will dictate a lot of what you're describing, the fees that can be charged. But these are bridges are things that need to be extremely secure, and they cost money to maintain. So users might want to use a bridge that they can trust the security around if they're then paying a fee or whatever. So I think the first thing to keep in mind is these are, in general, less permissioned or unpermissioned systems that are non-proprietary, where there's a huge amount of user freedom. Therefore, the free market will normally dictate how the economics shake down. But tech is still pretty hard to build, and there's only a few people that are building it at the highest level and can still charge for that, and that's why developing specialisms, developing expertise, and offering that into this metaverse economy can be a very lucrative place to be, but not because of proprietary walled gardens, but just because of expertise.
One thing
Question.
well, one element I'd like to add to that question is like really thinking like what are the value accrual mechanisms towards those digital assets, and like how economies, specifically in game and entertainment, were designed before, where you sell once and then you have like this constant content treadmill, meaning like the existing asset keep decreasing, depreciating in value since they have no more utility and like infinite supply. We're thinking at like strategies where everything we do, we might not monetize directly from a primary sale, but still it builds value into our overall ecosystem. Let me give you an example. Why do we spend so much energy and time to bring and allow people to play with their NFT collection, avatar, etc.? Because then they spend time in Sandbox, they might get inspired and want to own a land to build in their turn, participate into the whole circular economy, hire artists and creators of our ecosystem to build their own land. Maybe they will want as well to definitely experience the content from the other creator as well, not just the one that they came from with their avatar collection. So it's contributing to distribute the value across an ecosystem and make it communicate from one world to another within the platform and outside of the platform, which is really that open economy, that open metaverse we are talking about.
Yeah. So we touched on like ups and downs a little bit. And Robby, I'm sorry to bring this up, but Axie Infinity, I think it would be an understatement to say that was just an up and down. But you know, you're all sort of responsible for economies now. And you know, for instance, with Axie, we heard that there's people in the Philippines kind of using your economy to help feed their families and operate like that. So what are you doing now to kind of safeguard your users in terms of cybersecurity or tokenomics and things like that? And what advice would you give to all the people here who are kind of starting metaverse projects and things like that to kind of safeguard their users from, whether it's currency stability, price rationality, things to kind of protect them from hyperinflation and issues like what happened there?
Okay, so I guess there's a lot to unpack there. So I think cybersecurity, I think one thing that Sarah was referring to earlier is that the tech works. So I think what we saw in the case of the Axie Infinity hack was, like with most hacks, human error being at the root of it as opposed to a technical fault. So the blockchain tech works. I think that it's very difficult when you have a much more open system that is subject to market supply and demand to have. You try to optimize security and safety for users because obviously you want everybody to have a good experience, but you can only control so much because it is subject to market forces. And I think that's part of what scares a lot of traditional Web 2 companies because they're accustomed to having that control. They're accustomed to pushing the levers of massive change. But we come from a different sort of philosophy and school of thought that actually the users are going to be able to push things in the right direction. I think when it comes to tokenomics, it's very important to be very, very thoughtful about it though. And you have to take that responsibility very seriously because you need to build an economic system that is going to be good for your users. You need to think about all of the behaviors that you want to incentivize because tokens are an incredible way to incentivize behavior. And you want to incentivize positive behavior. So one thing that we take as a philosophy is all the projects we work on, we try to incentivize the creation and enhancement of community because we think it's community from which flows all of the other things, user engagement, revenues, everything that we see as a positive outcome of a project, we think flows from community. So we want to reinforce community as opposed to creating tokenomics to maximize our revenue for the first year or something like that, because we think that those kind of economic systems are short-lived. But it does mean that you need people who are actual economists to help you with this.
One of the qualities of blockchain systems, because they have this freedom associated with them, because of the ownership of the tokens by so many people, is that they are, especially when, in fact, the token is widely held and there are lots, and the community is robust and it's reached a certain amount of scale, is that the system has the capacity to be self-regulating. So where, if there's oversupply of one type of token, or in NFT terms, a certain series of tokens, then the community can come up with a use, and in fact this has happened in AlienWorlds where we had very abundant NFTs and the community created certain ways of sort of using them up, right, because they were so abundant in the system. That doesn't always happen immediately, it doesn't always happen perfectly. A certain amount of scale is required in order for those self-regulating mechanisms to start to kick in, but at least, you know, the possibility is there. Of course, the original designers of the tokenomic flows in terms of inflation, for example, need to think that through extremely well, and that there need to be, you know, use cases of the token in addition to inflationary mechanisms, and that's, you know, a really key part of designing an inflationary mechanic into the tokenomics. The other thing that I would just say from a slightly perhaps more purist crypto perspective is that, you know, recall that sometimes systems that we think are really safe turn out not to be, right? Like that's what the credit crisis was, where we all were going along thinking that everything was very well regulated and the people in control knew how to price risk and that there couldn't be massive, you know, correlated risk in the system and so on. And we discovered that all of those assumptions were dramatically untrue, and that all of that was socialized, right? All of the damage that was done ended up being taken basically onto sort of public balance sheets. So it can feel nice for a while to think that you're in a safe environment, and then periodically reality comes back and tells you that actually maybe you should have taken more care or been, you know. So I think what's nice about blockchain systems, and although they're not perfect, at least we're a little bit more open about that, and we say, okay, well, you know, if you're going to come into the system, you might want to understand how or whether you're really owning what you think you own. You know, although I do agree that it's nice to provide wallet systems where people don't necessarily have to handle their private keys, I think the culture in crypto of being aware of, you know, custody is really good because it shows that people are taking some interest in whether they're really owning what they think they own, being aware of the projects that you're getting involved with and how sound they are at both a technical and tokenomic level. Personal responsibility is still a part of this story, and I think because you can never take it away, no matter how much you might like to think that you can just delegate your responsibility to some regulator somewhere, I think normally you discover eventually that that system isn't perfect either. So we're you know, trying to balance imperfect systems, and the one that currently we sort of land on more is like, okay, we're going to educate users and empower them, but ultimately we all need to sort of have our wits about us and be as aware as we can about what we're involved with.
Yeah, let me just show that. From Upland perspective, so the way we build our economy is actually we shielded our users completely from the crypto economy. So we don't have a tradable token. One is the regulatory reasons, because we're based in the US, a little tricky there to do these kind of things. But on purpose, we also said we don't want to connect it to the outer world, right? Because we always say the value is created with the NFTs. We see the token only as a pure utility, right? We have a fixed exchange rate. You buy $1, you get 1,000 APEX. We never buy back from our users the APEX, right? So how our users extract monetary value, they can sell the NFTs for US dollars to other players, right? So that's how they do it, right? I mean, we did get critique, hey, why don't you have a tradable token when everything was going up, right? Because people want to participate in that, right? But now people are happy because they don't have that. So it's either way, right? The way you do it, it's always very tricky. But you have to be aware of that, because I'm personally still skeptical that the majority of people, because doing, not to brag here, but I wrote a PhD about private and state-controlled currencies. So it's a complex, really complex issue, right? And it's so hard for most people to understand, right, how things work, right? And you can not put too much burden on people, right? So we really have to think ahead and make it easy and less risky for them.
The beauty of Web3 is that all of these different approaches can coexist.
Nothing to add on that question.
Are we?
More questions?
I guess, I'm sorry, Robby, unfortunately that's all we have time for. I mean, I wish that we could spend the rest of the day here with you guys. But what an amazing panel. Thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you.